Hey everybody, welcome to another edition of American Rambler. I am your host, Colin Woodward. Thank you for listening to the podcast. On today's show, I have Dan Gullotta. Dan is a podcaster. He is a historian. He is the host of the Age of Jackson podcast. Dan is a graduate student at Stanford University. He is working on his dissertation, which, as you might have guessed, since he is a host of a Jackson podcast, he's working on a Jacksonian era topic, more specifically about religion, and he passed his general exams not too long ago, so he is ABD, all but dissertation. ABD, which for a lot of graduate students is the best time of graduate school. You have no classes usually. Maybe you're teaching or grading, but your classes are done, your comprehensive exams are over, and you can focus on the research and writing of your dissertation. And it sounds like Dan is moving right along. He said he's going to be done either end of this year or maybe early next year. But he's making some good progress. He's already got a literary agent for a book that he is working on, based on his dissertation, obviously. So he's doing okay. He's out there in Kansas, even though he's enrolled at Stanford. He lives in Kansas. And in addition to hosting the podcast, he does online writing for places like The Bulwark. And also he's written for the National Review. So Dan is staying busy, and he's putting up a podcast about every week. So he's been productive there and has a very good following. He's got advertisers. So for a guy who is going on to the job market, Dan is very well positioned, and wishing him the best of luck with that. Once he's done with his dissertation, he might get a job before he's done. That does happen sometimes. What's been going on here? Well, I can pretty much sum it up in one word: rain, or mud, or mess. The backyard is a complete and utter mess. I don't think I've ever seen mud like this. It's the kind of mud that will, you could lose a shoe in if you step down the wrong way. Very deep, thick mud, really gross in the backyard, which is, usually kind of a disaster anyway, either the mosquitoes or we have drainage problems, and we are in the course of buying our house. And I think one of the things on the list is cleaning up the backyard, leveling it off, or putting in some more grass or gravel. I don't know what we need to do, but it is not pretty right now. And I know we've got a lot of rain, and all over the country there's been rain, but it's pretty gross back there. So don't even like looking in the backyard after a heavy rain. And we've just been getting rain and ice and snow and everything in about the last month. But it has not been as bad as other places. We didn't lose power. We had a neighbor who lost power a couple of weeks ago during that first bad storm. My workplace was shut down. Not that matters so much, since a lot of people aren't going in anyway. But, we've been staying home mostly because of the COVID, but the weather has certainly kept us inside more. So the kids are getting a lot of tablet time, and I'm catching up on some things around the house. But definitely ready for spring, and I don't know when it's going to dry out there. Probably not till April, honestly, because March is always a disaster weather-wise. You get all kinds of craziness. We might get some more snow or ice, or who the hell knows. So, March, you know what you're getting into. It's one of those months. It's like January. So it's going to be crazy. And we've had a few nice days in February, but it's been pretty rough. So, being inside all the time because of COVID, and then when the weather is really nasty, it is just cabin fever times 2. I think tomorrow's going to be better. So try to get outside and enjoy the sunshine while you can. I try to do a bike ride whenever the weather is nice, just to stay fit, get some fresh air, stay sane. But I do always have my walks. But man, some days recently I have been put to the test, having to double, triple layer up to go out there. And when it's raining really hard, it's pretty miserable. But I make myself do it anyway. One of those days when it was icing, it's a little freaky. You're hearing things break. And of course there's that movie, The Ice Storm, where a kid goes out during a storm and and gets electrocuted. So that was kind of at the back of my mind, probably one of the 10 people who saw that movie. But in any case, I hope you're safe and sound and your power is on. It's not too miserable, not too cold where you are, and things will be drying out soon. But have a good talk with Dan about grad school and doing a podcast and some larger history issues and podcast issues, some good stuff on grad school, and about Dan coming from Australia to become a citizen of the U.S. So here it is, me and Dan Gullotta. Thanks for talking with me today, and I know you just had your comps, so you're ABD now, so I wanted to congratulate you on that.
Thank you. It's getting close to... So I passed my comprehensive exams in March, April, so getting close to my anniversary, and I passed my prospectus, I'm going to say July, so yeah.
Okay. Yeah,
so I've been ABD for a little over 6 months.
Well, that's good. Do you like being ABD?
You know what? It's it's as liberating as people said it would be.
Yeah.
And not so much as well, because in a weird way, you really do have that freedom of like, I can go out and do what I want. And that's not to say, you know, I had huge restrictions on the type of assignments I could do, but still, you know, like you're on much stricter deadlines, and you may,
right.
You know, you don't really want to do a book review or a historiography paper, but you got to do it anyway. Yeah, even though it's a subject you find interesting and enjoy. And what's kind of interesting is all the admin stuff, like student meetings and the colloquiums and all that. They all kind of blend together in the kind of admin student life. But when you're ABD doing your own research, it is kind of interesting how much of a, sometimes anyway, an interruption the admin side can be, where it's like, oh, that's right, we got this meeting I got to go to. So I'm starting to get that sense of, you know, God willing, if I do become a professor, of that sense of like, oh, admin stuff interrupting research and writing.
Yeah, I guess that it's nothing like what you have to deal with when you're a professor, because I think, you know, the popular misperception of professors are they just read books all day and think great thoughts. But you do, you know, and the higher up you go, if you eventually go to the dark side and do heavy administration, you're just going to be putting out fires like all the time. But
or starting them in some cases.
Or yeah, I had a boss who was a provost, and she said something like, well, my job mostly involves preventing professors from shooting themselves in the other foot. So she had to deal with, you know, people bailing people out of jail, like all kinds of crazy shit. So it can get pretty wild. But yeah, I think you should enjoy this time. I know, unfortunately, and especially since California's been on lockdown, there's probably a lot of social stuff that you couldn't do that you could do normally. You know, I mean, just going out, like you have that freedom now. Yeah,
it's been a very cathartic experience in some ways, because it's really forced me to drill down on the reading and the writing and the research. But I love to travel, and one of the things I love about being a researcher and a writer is that traveling aspect. I love going to museums and archives. I get a very childhood rush feeling like Indiana Jones. And like, while I'm not running away from any boulders or anything, going into museums and archives and holding 18th century, 19th century handwriting documents in my hands is a real thrill. But I can't do any of that at the moment. So, you know, sitting in front of a computer screen looking at scans, and, you know, thank God they exist, but still, you know, it's not quite the same. So I am looking forward to, when I do get to go out in the real world again, I'm really looking forward to getting into the deep of research, sort of in the physical presence. But yeah, definitely hanging out with friends and, you know, properly celebrating with my wife and going out to dinner will be nice again.
Yeah, for sure. Well, I mean, I'm guessing, well, I don't know what the situation is at Stanford. Can you even access the special collections library there right now?
So I'm not at Stanford. I'm living in Kansas because of the thesis writing
Oh,
process. However,
okay.
I can tell you that Stanford is currently, the situation changes week to week sometimes. But basically, while it was on lockdown, you would have to put in an appointment, usually a week ahead of time. You would get about an hour to go to the circulation desk. Well, it depends. If you wanted to go to the special collections, you could block out hours at a time. I think it was 2 hours per day, with like a 3-time limit. And if you wanted to borrow out books, they had a special box that they would arrange for you to come collect stuff. One of the things that's been very nice is Stanford plugged in a lot of resources to up its digital access. So books that weren't previously available to us, anything I've needed that's new, I've put it on request and they've bought a digital copy. Just recently, even though I have the physical copy of the book, I wanted a digital copy of J.M. Opal's Avenging the People, so they got that. But also, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this right, but Hati Trust, they just bought a major temporary access to that. So there's all these much, much older books and documents and primary sources that I've been able to get my hands on. A lot of sermons, which, and also Scan and Deliver, they've upped their services. So I'm very fortunate that even though I don't have access to the physical library, and even if I did, it would be limited, I'm very blessed that Stanford has the capital to do that for its researching students.
Yeah, that's good. Now, I mean, sometimes it's even harder to find this stuff than you would in an archive online, but there's so much out there and just, more and more by the day. So that's good. You can do your research remotely, but it sounds like you're doing with a lot of printed material, sermons, things like that. So usually that's kind of the first thing that they'll scan is the old books and printed matter. But how long have you been in Kansas?
I've been in Kansas since about I think we left August, September.
Okay. Does your wife have a job there?
No, my wife works from home. She's a copywriter for a wine marketing company. So she's been working remotely for years now. Basically, when I was at Yale, she got a job with this wine company, and my wife is just that good. They kept her working remotely. So it's been a big benefit for working from home. So she's used to all of this stuff. But my wife is born in Kansas, so we have family here.
So you're there for family reasons mostly?
Yeah, just to be with friends. And my brother is also here. My brother married my wife's best friend, so I have family, more family here as well.
So the 2 Australians married 2 Kansans.
You are absolutely correct. Yeah, it's a rom-com
so how did you
waiting to happen.
Well, you have time now as ABD. You can work a little, fiction, creative writing into your day, I'm sure.
My wife's a fiction writer on the side, actually.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, she's written 3 fiction books. She's wrapping up her thesis, which is a novel through the Harvard Extension School. She did their creative writing and literature extension master's program. And she's written. She's been kind enough to dedicate this one to me because I was complaining so much about how bad fiction books about the Salem witch trials were, so she decided to write a good one. So.
Oh, okay. Well, I had a guy on the podcast, James Morrow, who wrote a book about the Salem witch trials. Have you heard of that one?
I have not.
I can't remember the name of it. I think Satan's in the title or something. But he's like a fiction fantasy writer, and that might be pretty. I'll track that down because I read one of his books and it was really good, and I'm guessing it's probably pretty good too. I can't remember when he finished that. Maybe
the fiction's usually good. It's the history that.
I'm sorry. Okay. Well, that's funny because that was some of the first stuff I read in grad school. I don't know if that was your experience. Did you read stuff on the witch trials?
Being at Yale, obviously, with Salem not too far away, and we had so many of the primary documents there. I took a witchcraft class at Yale with Kenneth Minkema, who's he's most famous as one of the Jonathan Edwards executive editors, but Ken's got a passion for New England witchcraft, so we got to study firsthand. I wrote a chapter for a book on Jonathan Edwards and witchcraft. So that was a lot of fun.
Oh, cool. Yeah, well, I'm from Massachusetts, and I remember going to one of the Salem witch museums when I was younger. It was pretty intense. They didn't sanitize it for the kids. So you're like, a diorama of a guy getting crushed by stones is pretty wild. Yeah. Well, that's cool. So you guys obviously met at Yale then. Is that where you met?
My wife? No, we met at a comic book convention.
Oh, where was that?
Las Vegas. I dragged her to Yale. So basically, the long and short of it is, my wife was kind enough. My then fiance, basically, you're giving up Australia, your family, and your job. So whatever you want to do, I'll try and help make that possible. And foolishly, I decided to be an academic. So tricked Yale into thinking I knew what I was talking about, and dragged her to Connecticut. And then I tricked Stanford into thinking I knew something else. And I dragged my poor wife to California. And statistically speaking, I'm probably going to drag her to a postdoc before a tenure-track job if that happens. So yeah. So My wife has the patience of a saint.
Well, that's good. Although there are worse places to be dragged to than Yale, Northern California. I don't know about Kansas. I've never been to Kansas. Well, I've never been to California either, for that matter. But I've heard good things about Stanford, and
I won't say anything bad about Stanford or Connecticut. They're both very expensive places for young couples, where one is basically the major breadwinner and the other has a limited stipend. Or at Yale, I didn't have any stipend. I worked in the library to make some money. So, I'm sure they're great places with two incomes, but when you're younger, it's difficult. Yeah,
no, for sure. And as you get older, you realize how expensive it is, when you're looking for jobs. And I was looking for a job once at Berkeley. It said part-time, and it was $65,000 a year. And I emailed them. I said, "Is this a mistake?" Because it's like a 20-hour-a-week job. And they said, "No, it's not a mistake." But then you look at the rent,
right?
And
exactly.
It's just like outrageous. So you have to make at least probably six figures just to get anything. I mean,
I've been on several Stanford hiring committees, and that is honestly, people think Stanford, who would want to turn down Stanford if they're at another university? And often people who have, larger families simply can't afford to move their family here, because if they have, if you've got a partner, a husband or a wife, or a significant other, and you've got multiple children under your care, finding say a 2-3 bedroom house is one thing. Finding like a 4 or 5 bedroom house, compared to what you could get in the South or the Midwest if you were a professor with a larger family, whole different ballgame. And that has been a discouraging factor in some of our job searches, believe it or not.
No, I totally understand that. And kind of regardless of where you're applying or what you're aiming for, it has a way of sucking up all your money, because even if it's a more affordable place, I mean, we have 2 kids. So if the schools aren't good, then you're like, well, maybe we should put them into a private school. And then that's going to eat up whatever money you had left over, because they're not going to pay you very much, in the deep South or whatever. I mean, I still see jobs, the starting salary, if you're even a professor, it's ridiculous. It was like what I saw 15 years ago when I was first on the job market. I mean, this is crazy. So I don't, certainly don't want to discourage you. I mean,
look, I'm going in with my eyes wide open, and I'm.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
And I have an exit plan, but I also have a strategy for navigating this market. So, I understand it's a combination of skill, luck, qualifications, connection. There is no perfect formula to getting a job, but there are better formulas than others. So,
But it sounds like, I think you're a bit younger than me, but I mean, in terms of doing the podcast and stuff, you've got some degrees here that I'm looking at. So you've been in the academic game for a while. So it sounds like you certainly know what's going to be coming at you when you're on the job market. But certainly want to get to the podcast. And how long have you been doing it now? You've got over 100 episodes. How long? Have you been doing it?
It's kind of crazy that you asked me this, because I was just looking this up the other day. I was polishing my CV, applying for stuff, and I have the podcast there, and I was like, oh my god, like, have I really been doing it? Have I really been doing it since 2018? And yeah, I started the podcast in January 2018, which is just bonkers to think about.
And I know you've talked about this before, but why did you want to do a podcast?
It's a good question. I have selfish reasons and, humanitarian reasons, if you will, philanthropist reasons. To start selfishly, I knew podcasting was a way to kind of raise my profile. I knew it would help me connect with scholars who I was interested in connecting with. And just, academia very much has a lot of reciprocity built into it, and service. So I knew it would help me in some ways, not completely. I knew the podcast would never get me a job, but it might be the kind of thing that would help my profile. But more importantly to that, and I do mean this sincerely, I just love the Jacksonian period. I love the early Republic. I love the antebellum era. I'm fascinated by it. And I just saw this like hole in the educational market that wasn't being filled. And I just assumed that there were other, obsessive types like myself and eager listeners. And I just figured, this could really be something people are interested in and could learn from. And I'm very grateful that that's proven true so far.
And I'm guessing your numbers are pretty good. I mean, you don't have to tell me exactly, but you got pretty good download numbers and feedback and all that.
Basically, I have a solid following of 1,000 people every Friday. When the new episode comes out, they download immediately. But over the course of the next couple months, pretty much every episode I have is just over 10,000 downloads. Okay. Except for the rock stars. When Gordon Wood comes on, that episode is like, God, it's like double that. So, there is, unfortunately, pretty much like there is a diversity, and I'm sure it's the same for you with like getting Jim Oakes on, for example. There is a huge disparity, but you get the celebrities in, and hopefully the listeners stick around for, and they might find new exciting reads.
Yeah. And was there someone in particular who kind of inspired you to do it, or had you just, obviously they're everywhere now and you figured, well, maybe I'll jump in on this. Was there one that really stuck out to you?
Look, I really loved what Liz Covart was doing with Ben Franklin's World.
Yeah.
The thing I liked it the most, and maybe this is because of my sales background, I really liked that it was selling a product, and by selling I mean like that at the end of this episode there was something tangible I could buy and sink my teeth into and get more out of it. And often these people had books or articles I could look into. So I really liked that. Other podcasts where it's kind of just historians and scholars shooting the breeze, it can be fun, but it can be a little too inside of baseball, I found. And I really appreciate the Liz. I know Liz personally. She's a great interviewer. And I think one of the things she does really well is, even though she has a Ph.D., she just basically asks, like, okay, who was Ben Franklin? Like, she'll ask us a simple question that she knows the answer to, and just she lets her colleagues be experts. And, I know what the Bank War was. I know what Indian removal was. I know who Andrew Jackson was. But I get to ask those questions. It reminds me of Larry King, actually. I was listening to an interview with Larry King about being a good interviewer, and I found out that he never read the books he interviewed people about. And because he kind of went in that blind, it allowed him to ask the most basic questions. Even though King clearly had, expertise and chops in different political, cultural arenas, I think there is something about that, which Liz emanates as well, and that I try and capture as well, that kind of going in blind and letting the people speak to their expertise.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know, people must send you books that they want to talk about and stuff like that. I mean, it's pretty hard to read everything before. I mean, even if they send they'll send you a new book and you'll try to read that. But like if it's someone like Gordon Wood or Jim Oakes, like they've written however many. I mean, Gordon Wood, I don't know how many books he's written, 20. But it's like you're not going to be able to master the guy's whole backlog. So it's kind of a choice. Like you say, Larry King. Yeah, I mean, totally understand that because it probably would have been impossible for him if he's doing a show every night or however many times he did it to read every book that was sent him or movie or what have you. I mean, I think you should try, but yeah, you're right. I mean, it
depends. It depends the subject. It really, like, there are some books that I think that there's a nuanced argument. It's a complicated book, so you kind of have to sit down and take your time with it. But if it's a book for a more mainstream audience, like, so for example, I just interviewed Peter Cousins' book. I just interviewed Peter Cousins. That episode's coming out soon on Tecumseh and Indian resistance. And I know that story pretty well. And that book is designed for a mass audience. So, I skimmed it, but it's not like he was reinventing the wheel. So that's the type of book I don't have to spend that long on, compared to, say, like, a 400-page book that has a really complicated argument about, tariff policy. Then I might have to slow down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and if it is a pretty big guy in American history, the Gordon Woods or the Oakes or Foner or whoever, at some point you will have read at least one of their books in grad school. So you can kind of fall back on that. But I've been doing a lot of research for Arming America, Michael Ballil, who you, of course, have interviewed. And I thought you did a very good job with him, and also Joyce Lee Malcolm, who can't stand him. But I'm falling down a lot of rabbit holes with that book. So
I'm curious, what are you working on?
Well, he just out of the blue, I'm on academia.edu, and he put some comment about this article that I wrote about the slaveholders, and I guess he's doing research on it. I'm not sure what for, but I was like, Michael Ballil, is that the Arming America guy? So I contacted him through academia, and he said, I'm doing so-and-so research, and I said, I was thinking about you the other day because I remember that whole catastrophe very well. I was in grad school and was probably around the time I was going to start my dissertation, or if I hadn't already started it, and that was in the news constantly. So I reached out to him. I said, you want to do the podcast? He said, sure. I have a new book. I said, okay, I'll read the book. But
is this the Reconstruction book?
It's called, I think, Inventing Equality.
It
came out. Yeah.
It's the Reconstruction book.
Okay, so he starts in the early Republic and all this stuff. So I'm trying to get a handle on that, but also go back. And I mean, it's just nuts. And I know you've talked about it. I know you talked about it with Keith Harris. Like, you would like to do a documentary about that book and the controversy, which I think is a great idea. I don't know how many history docs are out there about, like, the history of a history book as a documentary. I think would be really interesting. But what was kind of you came across that through David Blight in a seminar in Yale.
Yes.
Is that right?
Yes, that's correct.
And
Blight just threw it out there as this controversy that we all knew about. And then all the students basically had this same blank look on their faces. And he basically was like, "Oh man, am I getting old?" So he had to explain the controversy to us. And as soon as he said it, I jumped onto Wikipedia and I read the kind of cliff notes, and then I immediately went to the library and borrowed out a copy. And that's how I was first introduced to it.
And then you reached out to Ballil?
Yeah, years later.
Okay.
For listeners who don't know, I have a series called History of History, which is kind of like historiography books, where I want to interview experts about other experts about major books in the field. And many of these books still shape us, and they still have big influence. Schlesinger's Age of Jackson, Daniel Walker Howe's What Have God Wrought. But this was one of those books I was like, you know what? This would, because of all the controversy it stirred. And for those of you who don't know, the thesis of the book is that America's gun culture despite what we've been told, is not really something that we can easily trace back to the colonial period and the early republic. That America never had as much guns as we think they did, and Americans were never as interested in guns as we think they were. That basically this gun culture we have has an origin story, and he's trying to tell that origin story. You can understand the context when this came out shortly after Columbine, From My Cold Dead Hands, Second Amendment debates, Bowling for Columbine documentary with Michael Moore. So, it won the Bancroft Prize, but people started to do research into it, and there were some gaping holes in his arguments. And beyond that, there was evidence that some of the evidence wasn't adding up the way that he was claiming it was. And then one drama after another, there's the internet is happening at this period. So there's forums, there's a flooding in his office that ruins his notes at Emory University. And eventually he ends there's I'm probably rambling, but yeah, it's quite the dramatic saga, which ends with him leaving his job, the book being the only book to have the Bancroft Prize removed.
Yeah, it's a very wild story, and I remember it well when it was all happening in real time. I don't think I'm going to have time to read a lot of Arming America. I've sort of been jumping around, and I mean it's an awful thing to feel like you have to do, but I went through a footnote and I'm like, okay, well, let's try this out. Let's take this footnote for a spin and see what happens. And, what I found did check out. I mean, the sources he was using, I don't know how he found that stuff. I mean, I pulled it offline because it was digitized, but I'm like, even if some people accused him of like copying other people's footnotes and stuff. Like, even if he did that, I don't know how he found the secondary source that had this footnote. I mean, it was really deep research, one way or the other. But it's complicated, like you say, because he is a very charming guy. I mean, it's without a doubt he did a ton of research for that book. And I mean, people were really out to nail him to the wall. I mean, it was a vicious, vicious campaign against him. And I think if he had not won the Bancroft, none of the other stuff would have happened. I don't think he would have had to resign. I don't think they would have had these committees. I mean, maybe it would have happened, but I think getting the prize just brought so much more publicity on it. But he was everywhere. I mean, he was on Terry Gross's show. I mean, there was ads in the New York Times advertising the book. So
I only own one copy of Playboy magazine, and it's the copy that has the interview with him in it.
Okay, yeah. I mean, he's a good talker. He's a good writer, obviously. So the fact that he was able to keep writing books, the fact that he's still willing to talk about it is certainly a testament to his persistence. And I mean, it scared the shit out of me, honestly. I mean, I was worried because I was writing about slavery, the Civil War. I was worried some Sons of Confederate veteran or flagger was going to, be tracking down all of my footnotes. I mean, that's maybe a little paranoid, but I think if you held up a lot of books to that kind of scrutiny, you'd have some real problems. So I want to do as much homework as I can before I talk to him. But it's kind of it's like you're preparing for a court case with that book. It's like the prosecution and the defense. So it's pretty intense. So you said you're doing research on the Creek War. Is that what your dissertation is about?
No, well, it's one chapter on the Creek War. Basically, my thesis in a nutshell is about how religious politics influenced the rise of Andrew Jackson and the birth of the second party system. So how do these religious coalitions, as I'm calling them, arise and help formulate around Jackson, but also against Jackson? So that's basically it in a nutshell, religious politics. Religious politics.
Well, you have quite a background in terms of religious studies. Why? I mean, you're in the Department of Religious Studies. Did you think about just being in a straight up history department at some point?
I did. I guess because my trajectory was so religious studies, I didn't seriously think about that I would even get into a history program. to be honest.
Okay.
But beyond that, like, religion really is my motivating interest. I'm an historian. That's how I operate as a person. But when it comes to almost every subject I study in history, I want to know what's the religious angle, what is religion doing, how is religion involved in these discussions. So I just religion is my bread and butter, basically. So in a weird way, I kind of like having my cake and eat it too. There are many debates in the religious studies department I don't care about. So in a weird way, I think my vocation has become to help make historians treat religion better and to study it better. So I think that's kind of become one of my vocations.
So you're not necessarily going to get into the weeds with theological debates or something like that.
No. I'm not a theologian.
Yeah.
No, after a glass of wine or two, maybe, but not in the classroom.
But you, at one point, thought about being a Catholic priest?
A Catholic priest, then an Anglican priest. Yes, yeah.
Okay.
I have a complicated religious story.
Yeah, well, I was raised Catholic, so I'm sure I could relate to Catholicism stories. But this is you're raised in Australia, and obviously they have a Catholic presence there. Do they? I mean, is coming to America? Does the religious history of America fascinate you in a way that there's just things going on here that don't go on in Australia?
Oh, absolutely. Look, don't get me wrong. Australia does have its own religious politics, but I never really studied religion in Australia all that much. In Australia, I was a biblical studies guy, so I was interested in the ancient world. When I started dating Kate, who was then my girlfriend, now my wife, I was like, oh, I'm dating an American, so I should probably learn American history. And I just found the American history and American religious history like crack. Like, it was just, I absorbed it. I loved it so much. And I love how it's much more overt here, that's for sure. Religious politics are much more overt. And it's one of the way, in terms of, not to be a presentist or anything, but in terms of connecting contemporary issues, the thing that kind of frustrated me, and maybe this is because I live in such a, deep red state in Kansas, and, when I was rubbing shoulders with like secular types, it's like, well, like the Democratic Party is the secular party and the Republicans are the religious party. And I was always like baffled by that statement, because, or sentiments like that, because just look at Joe Biden's inauguration. Like, there's inculcations of God everywhere. Look at Joe Biden's coalition. And, when there's a great example of this, when Republicans are asked how religious they think Democrats are, or how many people believe in God who are Democrats, they always say something like half or something, when like atheists are something like 5%, because atheists are such a minority of the American population. Like, yes, like they do tend to be Democrats, but when you actually look at the breakdown of Democratic numbers, like, the vast majority of them are still religious. And there's, the Democratic National Convention, calls to prayer, God Bless America, all these religious songs. And that's kind of the thing that frustrated me going back to Jackson's day. The same kind of dynamic emerges where the Whigs, because the Whigs are predominantly, and then later the Republicans, because the Whigs and then the Republicans have the vast majority of evangelical voters, they're the religious party. So whenever you read these monographs or articles that focus on religions and antebellum politics, it's basically a huge study of the Whigs with a couple of lines on the Democrats. And that basically continued to frustrate me. So I'm going to write the monograph on it, basically. Democrats have religion too, is the sort of tweet size version.
Well, and you're really complicating because you're talking about the 1820s and 30s, right?
Yes.
So you're talking about the rise of the second party system and how kind of religion filters into that. Was Andrew Jackson a religious guy?
Yes and no. He's not a deeply religious man. But that's the thing. When you compare him to the sort of first generation of leaders, you might say he was deeply religious. He's just not deeply religious for the sort of second great awakening standard. He's not evangelical. He's a pious Presbyterian. He definitely believes in God. Almost every account we know of him, he definitely spent time studying the Bible. He went to church regularly. His wife was incredibly pious. Rachel does have a kind of evangelical spirit to her. In his retirement, he does get more religious, probably because he's thinking about his mortality and he wants to join Rachel in heaven, as he believes. But look at his speeches, and they're full of lots of religious rhetoric. He calls Henry Clay, the Judas of the West, and he uses in the Creek War, for example, he imagines himself as some kind of holy avenger, talking about destroying the Babylon of the South, talking about Native Americans. So he has a very religious language to him, for sure. During the Petticoat Affair, he talks about the people who are criticizing him for supporting Margaret Eden. He calls them, they're just like Pharisees who persecuted Christ.
Well, it's funny you said yes and no with Jackson. That's kind of a common answer, I think, with Jackson. It's like, well, is he strong in federal government? Well, yes and no. It's like, he's just one of those guys. He says a lot of things. Sometimes you're not sure if you should believe what he's saying. But I've never really thought about his religious beliefs. So that's interesting to know. And
it's much more, my thesis is less about Jackson and more about how Jackson becomes a lightning rod for these issues. And how Jackson's presidency basically creates the battle. If you want to know how how evangelicals become Whigs, that's the story I'm telling in one respect. But if you also want to know why Catholics stick with Jackson and Jews and freethinkers, why are they attracted to the Democratic Party? Basically, the sort of Cliff Notes version is a lot of this is the sort of religious drama where there are these longings to sort of renew a kind of Christian godly republic that many religious leaders feel that the American Republic is losing its godly status, and they need to restore a republic of righteousness and virtue. And part of the issue is when they start looking at this new generation, many of these people are worried that they're not up to snuff. And you kind of get a taste of that with John Quincy Adams versus Andrew Jackson. And if you look at their criteria, Henry Clay is another good example. If you look at their sort of crib sheet, Jackson is a war hero, so that, that many people think that Jackson's battle at New Orleans is kind of God ordained. It's that miraculous. But he's an Indian fighter. He's a slaver. He has a very violent temperament. He's a duelist. But he's a Presbyterian. John Quincy Adams, on the other hand, he's scholarly. He's got this aristocratic appeal to him. He's very virtuous, and he has all the sort of right boxes. But he's a Unitarian, so he's not an Orthodox Christian. So
okay,
what do you if you're a pious Trinitarian? Who do you pick? And many people start to scratch their heads about this, and we start to see in the 1820s sort of debates emerge where many of them would rather have Jackson, who's a Trinitarian, despite his flaws, than a Unitarian. And there's all sorts of debates about that. But then when Jackson becomes president, many of these people he lets down. One of the ways he lets them down that we don't talk about is Roger Taney. Roger Taney is famous today because of Dred Scott, which, he should be famous for, or infamous for. But Taney's nomination to the Supreme Court was controversial because he's the first Roman Catholic appointed to the Supreme Court. And the fact that Jackson appoints, a papist to the Supreme Court, many people are absolutely horrified about this. So there's actions like this that basically drives people away from Jackson, but also brings people closer to him as well. And we start to see the formation of the second party political system around religion, along other issues, of course. I'm not saying religion is the be-all, end-all, but rather religion helps clarify these new battle lines and coalitions.
Okay. Yeah, well, that's interesting. And as we all know, Catholics take their orders from Rome, so how can you be an American and still be Catholic is kind of
well that
what the issue
evangelicals use that. They use that rhetoric. That rhetoric exists right then all the way to John F. Kennedy.
Yeah. Well, and we're seeing it now. It's flipped in terms of the parties. You know, Trump is held up as this Christian evangelical figurehead, and Biden is the Catholic guy going to church every week, but somehow he's branded as unchristian because of his certain views. So yeah, you still see that playing out. I mean, every election cycle. Sure.
But even the Catholic stuff, Amy Coney Barrett, there were all these think pieces about, like, you know, should she be on the Supreme Court because of her theology and things like that. So, like,
right.
You know, like, these issues are still with us. And, you know, the same thing, the criticisms of Muslim members of Congress about, you know, swearing on Qurans and things like that. Many of the same issues that we see then are still being played out today.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. And being in Kansas, does this help you with your understanding of American religion or your research? I would imagine you hear in the news or whatever, there's some pretty extreme groups in Kansas. What's your take on the religious culture there?
I moved back in the age of COVID, so I haven't got to experience it. But, okay. You know, like, it's deeply evangelical where I live. You know, I don't mind it myself. I find it, you know, kind of quaint. It's not my religious flavor, but I think, you know, watching academics talk about it on Twitter basically is further evidence why some people suck at, you know, persuading people. But, you know, I definitely have abided that being away from Kansas after living here for a while and then moving to the coasts east and west, I've definitely gotten that flyover state chip on my shoulder whenever people start talking about the Midwest, even as an immigrant. The way there is a sort of scornful tone that people take, particularly when people talk about the job market, how they pray they won't end up in the Midwest. And that really does disturb me, but that's a whole different conversation.
Well, I mean, I've been around. I've lived in Arkansas. I've lived in Baton Rouge. I mean, so I've seen, you know, I've been in some very deep red states, and Virginia is still kind of walking that line. But I mean, no matter how you slice it, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone in this country who either A, wasn't raised in a very religious household, or B, wasn't one generation removed from someone who was very religious in their family. I was raised Catholic. I mean, my wife is raised in an evangelical church. And so no matter who you are, you know, you said like 5% atheists or whatever, like the vast majority of people here spent a lot of time in church growing up.
Absolutely.
So it's really just kind of built into our DNA. Is it different in Australia? Is it a more secular society, or does it just kind of depend?
I wouldn't say it's more secular. I think it's more we don't talk about it. It's coming from Facebook and social media have changed this dramatically. But when I was growing up, and again, this is anecdotal, but I was very much raised in my immediate friendship circle. You don't talk about sex, religion, or politics at the dinner table, and you don't talk about that with friends. And for a long time, I mean, I still have no idea how my mother votes. I have my assumptions, but I have absolutely no idea how my mother has voted in the last Australian elections. And for a long time, like my neighbors and my family, you just really didn't. Yeah, even back years ago when I was an undergrad dating, you just didn't really bring up politics. But now I think that's changed a lot. And coming to America from talking to friends my age, politics was kind of on 24/7 as soon as they were teenagers, that they can remember talking about this. So yeah, it's a very, very different culture.
My perception of Australia is purely from movies. I've never been there, never spent any time there. So I'm imagining when you got here, were there some people just kind of stupid stereotypes of Australia, or were they a little bit more enlightened than that?
I mean, look, there's, I don't know how to answer that. I think it's all in good fun for the most part. I think I've only met one person who has used my Australianness in a derogatory way on purpose to kind of mock me and my background. Everyone else has kind of been that like, oh, I love Crocodile Dundee, and it's kind of eye rolly,
right.
But like, it comes from a good place, and they're trying to connect with you. So I don't hold grudges or anything like that.
Well, I don't think there's probably anyone in the U.S., not many people who have some sort of beef with Australia. I mean, it's a long way away. So
it was
a lot of people have been there.
It was more rooted in a kind of xenophobic, immigrants taking women and jobs, and that was laid at my feet by a stranger, which was kind of shocking.
Well, you have taken the women, and you're working on taking a job, so...
Well, you caught me red-handed, but still, like, that's beside the point.
No. I've had the same issue kind of living in the South and grappling with how I perceived it, which I didn't really think much about it at all before moving to it. And, to some degree, the stereotypes are true, and other ways they are not. But I'm still here, so I have
the opposite problem. I'm too patriotic for many academics. I love this country. I love calling myself an American, and I took the oath of allegiance last year, and many academics are kind of just shocked that like, why would you leave Australia for this? And I like, many academics like raise their eyebrows when I say that I think this is the greatest country on earth at times. Sometimes I do that to troll, but still, like,
sure.
It's kind of the opposite as well. The sort of, I think people are more surprised because of the circles I think we walk in as academics. People are more surprised by my patriotism than my Australianism.
Well, give it time, Dan. Give it a few years, and I hope your patriotism holds. How long have you been here?
I have been in America now 6 years.
Okay, yeah. Well,
5 years. 5 years to become a citizen.
Okay. Well, congratulations with that. But
thank you.
Again, yes, be patient. It will disappoint you at some point, and then you'll have this sort of second wave of patriotism where you'll be tested. I'm kidding about that.
I love one of my favorite things is like rattling off American history to Americans with my accent.
Oh God!
And my father-in-law always gets like a grin when we're out at a museum or something, and I start, doing what we do, like, well, actually, like doing this kind of thing, and he always just laughs, like, the Australian knows more about American history than Americans, but that's I think that's the benefit of immigrants. Immigrants remind natural born citizens why their country is great. They're the ones who came here.
Well, and sort of, I mean, what is your take on the American historical consciousness? Do you think it's about average, bad, good? I mean, I think a lot of, you look at stuff on Twitter and it can drive you crazy regardless of your politics, but like the difficulty that historians have getting through to Joe Sixpack or Joe Plumber or whatever. I mean, it's really tough. Do you worry about that? I mean, I know you have family encounters, but
I think we have a more messaging problem. Talking to Michael Haddam about this, I think he put his finger on it really well. That Americans love history. They love consuming history. Like, David McCullough and all those guys do really well. The question is, what type of history are they selling? And it's typically a much more romantic, glorious version of our history. But then on the flip side, I think, what's the history we're selling? And often it's basically America sucks sometimes. Now, that's a really simplistic and probably unfair rendering. So I think part of the problem is, trying to take the good and the bad, trying to have a sympathetic ear can be really difficult. And I think, I have constantly been surprised by Joe Plumber and Joe Sixpack's grappling with the dark side of American history. In my own encountering with lay people, it's not so much they don't want to know about the dark side of American history. I think the problem can come down to is there's usually some kind of string attached that they should somehow feel responsible for it. And that, I think that's when people start to get uncomfortable, those sort of implications. And I'm rambling. I'm probably not answering.
No. No, that's totally understandable. And I think the problem is people kind of compartmentalize their knowledge. So you might encounter a guy who knows a lot about the Battle of Gettysburg and the military, like the really like hardcore, this, the left flank is doing this at 2:38 p.m., like that kind of hardcore military stuff. But they might not be so great on the bigger picture, not so much Gettysburg, but like, the Civil War and politics of that period or whatever. I mean, they kind of have this buff knowledge, but then you ask them about slavery and it's like, oh, whoa, sorry I asked about that. But I think we can kind of learn a little bit from everything. I mean, probably a lot of people will surprise you with what they might know about history, but it's not, obviously it's not like grad school where you're sort of, every period you have to master to a certain degree, and then you kind of settle on whatever it is you want to study. But you've talked about in your podcast, you have this quote from James Baldwin. Do you want to talk about that a little bit? It kind of speaks to this idea of it's not as bad as you think, but it's also worse than you think, to really oversimplify it.
It's that Baldwin quote has stuck with me ever since I saw it, that American history is larger, longer. So even that, I love that it's, American history goes beyond the United States when we think about indigenous history. So there's that. It's, it's larger. So whenever we're talking about particular events or settings, there's usually a much bigger geography and history to it. But he also says that it's more beautiful and more terrible. And that it's those last two characters that have always like stuck with me. And usually, I mean, that's part of the issue is that any human life, and maybe this is because I'm Catholic, but any human life is never one thing. There are always moments of sheer bliss and happiness and moments of dark nights of the soul and absolute heartbreak. No one's life story is a full tale of woe, and no one's life story is a full tale of bliss. And America's like that. America has never had a linear, straightforward story. And the more I study history, the more I've realized that you kind of have to take. It depends your audience. It really depends your audience. It depends your interlocutor, and it depends what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I mean, people have been throwing out the James Baldwin quotations left and right in the past 5 or 6 years, and he's the guy. I'm ashamed to say it, but I've just started reading him. And of course, I've known about him forever. I never managed to get to him in grad school, but it is a very interesting perspective that he has, and certainly being African American and from the North kind of complicates a lot of ideas of how we think about race or think about patriotism or whatever. So I think that's kind of a perfect quote to think about as a historian. And I mean, I'm sure you've had this experience, but grad school, you'll meet people who from different walks of life, and I had to have a lot of arguments with people that were way their view of it was way more in the kind of conservative view of American history, but we managed to have shouting matches where we could just walk away from it and see them the next day. It was like nothing happened. So that was nice, and that was one of the best things about grad school. But I feel like it's a lot harder to have those conversations. What do you think? Do you think the climate is it so overheated it's hard to have certain debates, or does that just kind of not bother you, just kind of plow through?
I mean, there's a lot of ways to take that. I mean, like, definitely the climate has changed, and Twitter has changed it, like, in some respects, and look, I'm on Twitter. I think Twitter is, it's kind of like eating from the knowledge of good and evil. It's dramatically changed people's lives, and in many good ways and bad ways. But seeing people complain about their colleagues, complain about their classmates, like, ugh, I can't believe this dude said that. And if you're that dude and you read that on your colleague's Twitter, like, is that going to engender a feeling of intellectual honesty and a feeling of intellectual respect? No, of course not. But then there's also like the homogeneity as well. If the reports are to be believed that basically the vast majority of the academy leans leftward, and most of the debates are basically liberals versus progressives, and in many ways that's a kind of left on left on left fights that go on. Many conservative students don't feel welcomed, so there's that issue as well. There's that problem, and then I think there can be these sort of heterodoxies, these orthodoxies that emerge that we're not meant to challenge anymore. And then there's just so much to read as well, as that can be difficult as well. Yeah, it's historians being pundits, and I can't talk because I do a little bit of punditry on the Bulwark and things like that. But still, I think there's, nothing is, we're historians, nothing's ever monocausal, but the climate is definitely different. And I think there's also a kind of personalization that we really personalize our theses become a part of our being in many ways. And, I'm friends with Charles Sellers and Sean Lewentz, and I wouldn't say I'm friends with Daniel Walker Howe, but I know him. I have his email. And as you can imagine, those three guys radically disagree with one another. Even Sean and Charlie are much closer in agreement than Dan. But, they still have a beer afterwards every time they've hung out. And I don't know if some academics would do that with their interlocutors as much as they disagree with one another.
I don't know what the numbers are in faculty. I think probably it's a safe bet to say, a lot of faculty at certain places are pretty liberal, but there's also a lot of liberal faculty at generally conservative schools. I work at one right now. I'm not teaching, but they broke it down. I was like, most of the kids voted for Trump and most of the faculty voted for Biden. So it's like, even if the
that's fascinating.
It's an all-male school, Hampton, Sydney, and Central Western, I guess you could say, Farmville, Virginia. It's definitely unique there, but I've also worked at Smith College in Northampton, Mass., which is about as liberal as it gets. So I've kind of, been bouncing around, and you have too. You've lived in conservative places and more liberal. So I think that's good for your brain and also your scholarship. Willentz is on your committee? Is that right?
Yes. Sean's on my committee.
How did you meet him?
Oh, okay. If you want to get to some spiciness.
Sure.
Not really. So I had him on the podcast to talk about his book, and I had to do everything in my power not to fanboy out. In the Sean Lewentz versus Sellers versus Howe debate about I think Rise of American Democracy is a grossly underrated book. Yes, it won the Bancroft, but still, I dare say, I'd be curious for your opinion. I think in terms of the Jacksonian interpretations, Howe has probably won the fight the most amongst historians. Although even that's starting to change, though, in a different way. That basically the Jacksonians have kind of lost their street cred over the years more and more. And I think Lewentz has definitely... I think Lewentz's argument we need to grapple with. Anyway, that's beside the point. So I got into the James Madison summer program, which is a Princeton, conservative. It's a conservative space where we debate the moral order and the Constitution and things like that. And again, that's one of those... look, to sum up my political being, I typically am the most right of center person in a liberal space, and I'm usually the most left of center person in a conservative space. So if that tells you about...
Okay.
If that tells you about my political being, that's usually the history I have.
That's kind of, I perceive myself that way a lot too. And part of it is a natural contrarian streak that I've really had to work on.
Yeah, I feel
as
that.
an adult.
I feel that.
Because it gets obnoxious when you're older, and especially when you're married, it can really sink you. So I've tried to make that more constructive or whatever. But politically, I don't want to be on either end. And speaking of Twitter, my God, I've taken a lot more hits from the left and the cancel culture than anyone right-wing, because it seems like the right-wing now, it's so much easier to see them coming at you if you're kind of a more centrist person, but the cancel culture can really kind of sneak up on you and make you miserable. So I've had to make some adjustments on Twitter, but yeah, you were saying because you met Will Lentz at Princeton.
I was at Princeton for this weekend, and I asked Sean if we could get a coffee, and the week it happened, that's when the big hubbub came out where Nicholas Guyot at Cambridge University published his rather scathing review of No Property in Man, which I thought was a great book, and I thought his review was rather unfair. I told Sean this over coffee, which, as you can imagine, endeared him to me immediately. And within that same conversation, I was like, hey, now that you like me, will you be on my committee? And he said, absolutely. He said, Dan, if a man from California gives you the chance to come to California, you say yes. And it was I guess that was a New Jersey joke. Basically, he knew the Jacksonian Democrats so well. He knew that literature and period. I really wanted him. I wanted somebody on my committee who would just know that political party really well, and I'm amazed that he said yes. Sean's interesting. Sean hasn't had a lot of students, actually. That's one of the things that's kind of fascinating about, if you look at Sean's genealogy, unlike Eric Foner and David Blight and others of that kind of age group who had people, there's like a whole James Oak, Eric Foner school that has emerged at these different institutions. Sean's never had that kind of he's never had people knocking down his door to come work with him, and I think he's kind of sad about that. I don't know why.
That's interesting. Yeah, I don't either. I mean, he's such a huge name in the historiography. I mean, even if you're not a Jacksonian, you know who he is. You read him in graduate school, so that's interesting. But yeah, there are people here and there who, I kind of think back, I'm like, well, who's worked with that guy? I mean, obviously there are certain guys like Gary Gallagher in Civil War. I mean, my God, like everybody's worked with Gallagher, it seems, or knows someone that did. But yeah, Will Lentz, no, I can't say I've met anyone that's ever, not that I.
Jonathan Earle's probably the most prominent.
Okay. In Princeton, it seems so, rarefied air there. Like, I don't know what goes on there. But I thought maybe he's just so busy writing books, he doesn't have time for grad students. But it sounds like he would like to have worked with more.
That's the impression I got from him.
But he's got to be getting up in age now, too, right?
Yeah, he's older. I don't know how old he is. I mean, Sean's look, it's hard getting him on email. He's a busy man. Yeah, he's 69 years old.
Okay. So, who is your actual advisor?
Catherine Jim Lum is my direct advisor.
Okay,
she wrote a great book called Damnation about hell in American history.
Oh wow! All right, and so I guess sort of to lead you out here, like what's your timeline and kind of what are your ambitions on the job market? I know obviously you want to get a job, but do you maybe want to stick around in Kansas or go wherever the job leads you? Kind of what's your game plan?
The realistic plan and the unrealistic plan. The unrealistic plan, I am trying to get the first draft done of my dissertation done by December this year.
Okay.
So that's basically a year of writing to get the first draft done. Whether that's going to happen or not, I don't know. Most people think that's kind of foolhardy, but we'll see how it goes. I'm trying to get the Creek War chapter that I'm working on should be done by the end of the month. So we'll see. Basically by June, July, I'll really know what's it realistically looking like. Will I get the book done, the monograph done? The reason why I want to get it done so quickly for your listeners who are interested in grad school, because statistically speaking, I'm most likely going to do a postdoc. I would rather spend that time improving the manuscript, trying to get a job, trying to whip it into shape. I'm very lucky. I have a literary agent. So,
oh wow.
So my agent and I want to, obviously sell the project to a press. I'd rather spend that time as a postdoc doing that than as a grad student. having more leverage. And from there are some postdocs I'm looking at, as you can imagine. Some I have better shots at than others, but you can never know with these things. However, if a job opens up, I'll throw my hat in that ring. So yeah, hopefully it will lead to a job. If not, there's always menswear. So yeah.
Okay. Well, you could use you have kind of a background in sales, right? So
yeah. My background is in sales. I used to work for a watch company. I used to sell Rolex and Omega and things like that.
Oh wow!
And
you've packed a lot in, man. I mean,
I'm 32.
yeah. I mean, you've sold watches, so we're lucky to have you. If you were selling Rolexes at some point. I don't know.
the people who sell Rolexes don't make Rolex money.
Okay. It's all on commission. Is that how it works?
No, it was a salary.
Okay.
I did get commission, but it's
okay.
It's a whole that's a whole different animal.
Yeah. So I
love watches and menswear. So if this doesn't work out, I've joked to my friend Craig Bruce Smith, who's also into tailoring, that I'll open like a suit store or something.
Okay. So have you been teaching at all?
I taught last year. I taught a summer class on witchcraft in early America, which was a lot of fun. That was my first solo. I've been a TA a few times, but this was my first solo fly, and that was great. And I taught an early American history class at Cumberland University online, and that was good too. So I'd like to teach probably again. I've thought about teaching again next year, because this year I really want to focus on the thesis. But so teaching a class on witchcraft made me think about how I could expand it. I have a piece coming out with the Bulwark on QAnon and satanic panics and witch hunting, so keep your eyes out for that.
Yeah, the satanic panic, that's something I've kind of been interested in lately. I just watched a documentary on the Night Stalker from that guy, the serial killer from the 80s, I think was kind of part of that.
Yeah, he carved pentagrams, so kind of built into
right.
that.
Or I don't know if he was an actual Satan. He certainly, I think, did not help his court case when he was saying "Hail Satan" in the courtroom and threatening to kill the prosecutor. But whether he was a practicing Anton LaVey Satanist, I don't know.
No, probably not.
So, well, it sounds like you've got some of this. You certainly, for teaching, I mean, if you're well dressed and you have an accent, I think the students must take to you pretty well. In addition to your knowledge,
until they read the syllabus and what I expect of them. But,
they got the grad student guy with all the books on the syllabus. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it sounds like you've got everything pretty well put together, I gotta say. I mean, you've already got an agent, you've got a pretty good game plan. If you're going to be done with a draft by the end of the year, you're making pretty good progress, I would say.
Well, that's the real, like, will it take me another year? I don't know. It's probably far more likely, very rarely I think people get done in a year, but it has happened before, but I know people statistically take longer.
No, I mean, that's good. And I think the sooner you can get on the job market, the better. As challenging as it is, I think it's better just to start early. Have you actually applied anywhere yet?
I applied for one job. To test my toe, and didn't get it, of course. But I found out it was because I did not include how many weeks I worked at it was for a government history job, and they have they're a whole different animal, I discovered. So
yeah, those are you were like the usajobs.gov, like that kind of thing.
Yeah, apparently they expect a whole different style of CV.
That's brutal. Yeah, I've had one interview at the Library of Congress of all the years of applying there. So yeah, I think it's just persistence and sheer quantity of applications, because I don't know how many jobs per year are in early America. I mean, you might just have to teach kind of whatever in America, but it's tough. I mean, when I was on the job market initially, it was kind of the golden period of 2004, 2005, and I still check the boards for teaching jobs just kind of out of curiosity, and it's hard, but it sounds like you got a good game plan, you got a good CV, so I think you'll do pretty well.
Well, look, it's hard for everyone. It's hard for everyone, and that's kind of what I tell grad students or undergrads who are thinking of going to grad school. You know, you really, there is no magic formula. Like, yes, there are things you can do to help you, like go to a good school, that will help you. But the Yale, did you see the Yale report came out?
No, what was that?
45% of Yale PhDs get jobs. Which, like, I think, which is like 50, basically people are like, so it's a coin toss. But then, like, as some people pointed out, a coin toss is better odds than some places. Like,
yeah, sure.
Like, that's, 50-50 are odds that some people never get close to. So there's that, have a good topic, and you have to understand what trends are. And, like, should you do something that's trendy? Like, well, it might help you because you're in vogue, but it might be a hindrance because you'll get lost in the ocean. So, are the Jacksonians trendy right now? No, in fact, I'd say they're not. Is religion trendy? Actually, religion's kind of like getting in vogue right now with history departments, so that's good. Do people want to talk about Jackson? Well, in the Trumpian years, maybe. There's absolutely, there are so many things you can do to help yourself, but there's so many things that are beyond your control, and there are things that you'll never be able to control. And you kind of have to let Jesus take the wheel, as the song goes,
Yeah, for sure. No, I think you don't want to overthink it too much either in terms of what am I doing now? How might this play in the job market now or in a year to 3 years, whatever. I mean, it's who the hell knows? A lot of it's just timing too. You just happen to find the right place at the right time. And you're at the right place in your life too, because if something changes, you got to move or you got a family, like that complicates it all. So
absolutely,
yeah, I think the earlier better. So what do you got coming up on the Age of Jackson? How far out do you do? Do you have like 4 or 5 kind of in the can at any one time, or you kind of go rock to rock, as it were?
I used to, but dissertation has kind of made me go rock to rock, much to my disappointment. So I had that and COVID really upended my guest schedule, as you can imagine. So I had guests lined up who canceled because, their parents and school was canceled and things like that. So it's things like that, like it's COVID's kind of made all of us go rock to rock in many ways. But I do have things in the pipeline. I've got Christine Lyon Herman, Doom Romance. I'm talking to Bob Elder on Calhoun next week with his new Calhoun biography that just came out. I'm also talking to James. We just talked about him. Oh my goodness, Oakes. I'm talking to Oakes.
Okay.
Soon. Alan Taylor's going to come back when American Republics comes out. So yeah, there's a few. I'm trying to get a history of history organized on Southern Cross. Speaking of Lyman, so yeah, there's all sorts of things in the works. But thesis takes first priority.
For sure. But no, I mean, I have the problem if I do too many podcasts and they start stacking up and I got to edit like 5, it just total overload and panic sets in. So I agree with you. I think it's probably best to kind of go week to week, but you've been putting them out with regularity. I mean, that's a lot of episodes since 2018. You're doing them just about once a week, once every 10 days?
Yeah, once a week.
Yeah. All right. So people, obviously, they should check out the podcast, Age of Jackson, and where's kind of the second, third place to find you?
You can find me on Twitter at Daniel Gullotta, Gullotta. You can follow my opinions at The Bulwark pretty easily. I've also written on The Hill, National Review, and where else have I written? I have book reviews at Law and Liberty and New Criterion. So I'm all over the place in terms of my online presence. I have a Oxford shirt review coming out with He Spoke Style if you want to get some fashion advice.
All right.
And the Age of Jackson podcast, search it. You should be able to find it on iTunes, wherever you get your podcasting needs.
All right. Well, Dan, it's been great talking to you, and good luck with everything. But sounds like you got it pretty well planned out. But good luck with the writing, and good luck out there in Kansas.
Thank you, sir.
All right, that was my talk with Dan Gullotta. I hope you enjoyed that. Check out his podcast, The Age of Jackson. You can get that wherever you get podcasts. I listen to it on Spotify, but I know there are other places, iTunes. You can listen to Dan, and he's had a lot of great guests on there, from Gordon Wood to James Oakes and a lot of other people. So please check that out. And I think, probably the next couple of years, not too far off, Dan will probably have a book out, and maybe I'll have him back to discuss that. You can check out my book, Marching Masters, Slavery, Race, and the Confederate Army During the Civil War, available through University of Virginia Press. Still going full price on Amazon, but you can get a much cheaper copy from me if you want. I can sign it. You can get it all for $30. That includes shipping. Takes a little longer than Amazon. I know it's tempting to just hit the button on Amazon and get the book, and I totally understand that, but you can get a cheaper copy from me. I will do the work for you, ship it to you, and again, I can sign it, write whatever you want. So check out my book. Sold a copy the other day. They trickle in the sales, but nothing huge. Trying to finish the Johnny Cash book within the next few months and get a job by the summer. So a lot going on here, and I hope you're doing okay. And for whatever it is, I hope you got some good news recently. For even if it's something small, I hope you got some good news. Good news is hard to come by these days, and even just a little bit can be a huge boost, because I know a lot of us are obviously all in the same boat with COVID and waiting to get a shot. Most of us. But, our parents are, if you're my age, your parents are getting them first, and, the first responders and people like that. So just trying to be patient, but sometimes I kind of feel like, the last guy to get on the copter in Vietnam, you know what I mean? All right, I will be talking with you soon. Take care. Bye.